Chapter 1. Once Upon a Dream. What would I have said? What would I have done if I had known the real me? If I had owned the power of my own brother, would I have gone back and warned the Daniel I once was? Would I have told my young self that nothing can be done, nothing can be changed once your heart suddenly starts beating with a new, strange sound? What should I have done when it had become clear that the man I was with was not the one? The thousands of thoughts, words, feelings I had brought with me, were they part of a Daniel that wanted to stay, or were they part of me who wanted to move forward? It all began, or so I believed, when I started to question my own true feelings. The truth is, nothing ever started or ended. It was a circle of coming to life and coming to an end, a search for something greater, a hunt for the real power of love. Something didn't feel right. For a long time, something held me back, like I was meant to move further beyond what I long believed were my dreams. For a long while, I thought I felt the wrong type of love, a love that could seem strange to many, a love that didn't quite fit the picture. After all, I could only compare it with the love I had seen around me on TV or who knows where and when. When I met John, it wasn't special. It wasn't like I felt something new for the first time, but it was definitely strong. I was 27, during one of my trips from Italy back to the land of magic, how I love to call it. I had ended up waiting at the airport for 5 never-ending hours because the flight was delayed. There, right in front of me, lost amongst hundreds of empty chairs, John was drawing something on a large book, completely taken by a silent spell, with his sad look hidden within his own body, like a cat that tries to hide its form before falling asleep. His hair falling over his skinny face was like wet sand storming against the pale colour of his cheeks. The moment I looked over was the moment I got trapped in his magic movements. Between his hands and his book, there I was, wondering what he was drawing, thinking, feeling. My emotions were forming for the first time, like he could draw them with the bare power of his pencil. I felt the weird impulse to ask there and then what he was up to. And before I could realize it, I was standing right next to him. "I wish I could do something like that," I said. "I think it would make this awful waiting a bit more bearable," I added quickly, in the attempt to sound less of an intruder. "It's not that difficult," he replied, without even turning his head up to me. It was like he was about to save the world and I was a breeze moving through. Well, that wasn't it. "I imagine you're waiting for the same flight back to Ireland. It seems we are the only people left," I added. "There are a few down there," he replied, with a flat tone, at which point I was ready to raise the whitest flag of all the casual conversations. "But yes, me, you, and those folks over there are going the same way." And then he looked at me with such a small smile that I almost believed I'd imagined it. Those folks! How was it that I could see only him? We managed to put a few more sentences together before he engaged in a more appealing conversation, but there we were after 30 minutes telling our stories, attempting a laugh, meeting each other in a strange, invisible middle ground. On a half-empty plane, we decided to defy the steward's instructions and sat together to continue our mutual digging into each other's lives. I didn't know he was into me, and I didn't know I was into him. It was just the pure pleasure of sharing thoughts. Almost 3 years later, we had a lot to say still, and a lot of life to live together. At least, this is what I thought. Things didn't change from a day to another. For a long while, I thought I truly loved him, and that he was the right man for me. John never failed in being a beautiful human being, in making me feel loved. To this day, after the magic, the losses we had to endure, the tears we shed, he is still one of the purest souls who has ever walked on this earth. Whether I had chosen him or I had been moved by other hands, like a marionette bound to its strings. It didn't matter. It felt right. It felt like my heart wanted it. The unknown will behind every move I made, every corner I turned, had been there since the beginning of my time, with me and within me. It had been hiding for a very long time, silencing the fact that I had been moved like a pawn, moves and counter-moves by many, and furthermore by someone that had the power to own me completely. Initially, I was troubled in letting go the idea I could fight that unknown power. I had tried to stay by John's side even when it had become clear I was meant to be giving it all up. Nothing worked. I could not move either way. I could not have him, and I could not let him go. Somewhere in my troubled mind, I still remember when the first signs of my awakening started. It was subtle and concealed in small, scattered pieces of dreams I had at night. If I were asked then, I would have said I couldn't make sense of anything at all. Definitely, I would never have been able to understand that what I was actually witnessing was my first call. At first, I started waking up to a strange feeling of sadness. I didn't know why. I could not recall anything I had seen in my long walks. My days were filled with a sense of oppression and urgency, as if I was pushed out of my own body, my mind trying to have a life of its own. Then came the fog and its sense of oppression. Shortly after, the hills, the red harsh ground and the grey vast lake. Every time I had woken up with a sense of drowning glued to my lungs, my skin. A few months later, details became more tangible, and I began to feel like I was awake in my own dreams. Places and details would turn into new landscapes, spinning fast, vanishing before I had come to realize the nature of them. Worried about these persistent visions, I asked John if I did ever talk in my sleep, or stood up and walked, or did anything that could give me a hint to what was actually happening to me. "Are you sure?" I persisted as we were sitting inside a cafe in town on a heavy, rainy day. "Of course I'm sure." He couldn't understand why I was scared. "You are quite the opposite. Sometimes it feels like you're dead or something." "What do you mean, dead?" I asked, puzzled, losing a bit of my voice. "Calm down," he said, reaching out for my hand across the table, while I was holding my cup of coffee like I could destroy it with just the power of my fear. "Sometimes, and I'm saying sometimes, it feels like you've left your body or something. You just lie there, like you're not breathing." Like I left my body. Those words struck me like the thunders raging outside. "I've tried to wake you up a couple of times, but you were just lying there like nobody's home. I've never thought this was serious, because you usually are back moving and stuff a few seconds later. I'm sorry. I should have told you. But if it helps, I don't think this is something to be worried about," he added with the typical small smile he had given me what felt like centuries ago. "You know," I tried to explain, "it feels like something is coming my way." I know, I quickly added in response to his look. He was about to tell me his usual, "everything is fine." "I've this constant odd feeling of imminent change, like I'm standing on the edge of something, and I'm about to fall." "In your dream, you mean?" he asked. "Initially, yes. It feels like it's emerging to reality. I can feel it when I'm awake. I can feel it now." He looked at me with a mix of sadness and disappointment, like someone who had just lost the first prize on a big competition. He wanted to understand. He wanted to understand to control it. Or maybe that was me all the way, seeing in his eyes the cracks within my head. It wasn't long after that conversation, and not long before my 30th birthday, that things went on the fast track. My dreams quickly came to life, filled with sounds and emotions, while reality became less tangible, confused, and places had started to mix with impossible realities. A group of people were laughing loud. A celebration, a wedding, a strong scent of magnolias all around. I could hear the calling of a name. Someone was late to his own most important day. There was no panic. There was no fear, and there was, long before that sunny day. How can you feel things that have been when you have never seen them happening? How do you know what you are feeling if you have never felt it before? A long run of stairs was packed with people on both sides. There was happiness. There was loss, all at once. A tall man was standing right at the top, tension on his square shoulders. He was adjusting his suit, moving his dark hair away from his neck. 3 entities were watching over him. Am I meant to walk up those stairs? This sound, these feelings, I have to be part of it. Certain this was my life all along. I was already moving my steps forward when my body had frozen. I was stopped. One of the 3 celebrants had moved her eyes onto me. She was far away and she was behind me in the split of a second. Her hand was holding me back, pulling my arm away from that happiness, that moment I wanted with all of myself. "You are mistaken," a voice to my right whispered. "There are things that have been and are no longer. Things that have never been are waiting to be." I was mistaken? That moment belonged to me. As I turned to see and look, ready to ask what she wanted, there she was. An old lady was standing right before my eyes. I had never seen her, but I had met her before. She was there and she wasn't. I knew her, but she didn't look that way to me. She had the sweetest tone and the hardest look. "There are things that have been and are no longer. Things that have never been are waiting to be," she repeated. And there she vanished. Her place, her voice, and everything surrounding faded in a blink of an eye. I was wide awake, looking at the ceiling, frozen in a broken vow I didn't get to make. I wanted to reach that top. I wanted to see and make the promise. I wanted to say yes. The old lady was gone from sight, but I could still hear her whispers, like she had just moved somewhere over the wooden beams inside the walls, hiding in my own home. The days after that night, sleeping got more problematic. I wanted to know, and I was afraid to know at the same time. I forced myself to stay awake at first. Then, to be sure I wasn't going to dream again, I had music in my ears and read books before going to bed. And there I was, back again, despite all my efforts. A moment of weakness. My eyes had closed and my body was touching the inside of a small old boat, floating on the grey, immense lake I had learned to recognize at once. There was no sound, no breeze, no life. It was all flat, grey, like mist had fallen for days. With me, someone was sitting quiet. "Hello?" My voice was flickering low, like it was travelling through that same water I was floating on. "Who are you? Where are we?" Every word I said transformed into a useless bubbling sound. I could see the other man sitting still, frozen and wrapped in too many layers of dark, worn-out wool. A greenish glow was coming from inside his garments, and his hands were sticking through, holding an oar each, but to no use. We weren't moving. Then the water started to rise, silent. So fast I didn't have the time to act, and I was under. The top was now below, and the bottom was over my head. Flipped, submerged, there I was. I couldn't breathe. "Let me out!" The more I forced myself into keeping my dreams under control by staying awake, the more I started to lose control during the day. Working became unbearable, and I started to lie about the reason I felt so constantly tired. Trying to cheer me up, and with my birthday approaching, John invited our friends to our house for a pre-festive celebration. thinking that it would magically solve all the issues. "You'll see, that's what you need right now." He was showing so much confidence that I nearly believed it. "John, I don't think this is going to go away. I'm not going mad, I'm sure of it. Perhaps there's something that I have to figure out," I asked, almost like I was confessing it to myself. "I personally believe you shouldn't give too much attention to those dreams. It will only make it worse. After all, they are just dreams," he said, as he was going to remove all away with just the power of pure denial. "I know, John. This is, after all, at the very core of my profession. I'm trying to think what I would see in someone who's experiencing the same, what I would say to them, but it wasn't important and it wasn't real. Making it real would have made it important, or maybe it was the other way round. He had said that to me a few times, too many times. Our friends came along as planned that night, 2 days before my birthday, and all of them came with the intention of saving me from going mad. They didn't know from what evil I needed to be rescued, but John apparently had dropped a "to cheer him up" in the invite. "So what's going on? You're sad because you're getting old and wrinkled, or is there more?" Shannon asked, while helping me setting the table. Her boyfriend, Mark, already had his hands on the thing he loved the most after Shannon. He was pouring some wine, smiling at me like he wasn't taking any responsibility for that offensive question. "Shannon, let him be," he told her across the kitchen. "What?" she replied. "It's not like this is not going to happen to all of us." "Well, this has happened to you how long now? 10 years? Jumped in Anita, trying to take my side. "After all, he is the youngest of us all." And she walked through the front door out into the garden. "Come out, you birthday boy. It's still warm outside. Let's have a smoke," she shouted a few seconds later. Even smoking wasn't giving me relief anymore. There was no escape. My head would go straight to the madness I was going through. During dinner, we went in and out of the core of all my troubles without quite jumping right at it. I was happy like that. They were my friends, but I wasn't sure I could share every tormented detail or expect they would react in a surprising new way, a way that would solve the issue. "What do you mean it feels real? Like you're awake while dreaming?" Teresa was pretty late to every conversation, a bit lost in her own madness, but always willing to help anyone. "Not really. It's more like I can feel it, like it's happening for real," I tried to explain. "You are the psychologist here," Mark let out, smiling. "Should you not know what this is? You know, I've read in an article." And there Shannon was starting her mumbling about knowing everything about every single thing on Earth. "And they said that it's possible," adding a convincing face at the end. What is possible? I thought. I had lost her before I could tune in. "I'm not sure on what I'm about to say," Anita started, coming from nowhere. She didn't usually make open statements to the public, not even in a small gathering of friends. I was listening, surprised. "But I would say these dreams are coming to you for a reason. Don't get me wrong," she continued before Shannon could take over. "I'm not talking about ghosts or something like that. I'm talking about ourselves and our deepest thoughts." "Or it could really be a ghost." Teresa's eyes enlarged. "You know, my Auntie Marge, she had one. I'd say even more than one, considering how mad she went in her later days." And to her fingers spinning beside her head, we laughed, picturing the sad, funny look of Auntie Marge. "What would someone look for in a ghost, I mean?" Mark asked, leaving the table to get another bottle of wine and triggering an unhappy look in his girlfriend's face. It was almost like I could read her thoughts. "The more this conversation goes, the more he can drink blamelessly." "Guys, let's not go all crazy," John said. taking the bottle of wine away from Mark's hands. "Next thing, we are going to talk to a priest or something. We are not kids believing in magic anymore." Until that last sentence, I felt somehow attacked. "I think the obvious solution is most likely the right one. I think you're only trying to recall something, trying to resolve it." And Anita had just put an end to the crazy talks. She honestly stated the obvious there and then, but she was right. John redirected the attention to some cupcakes Anita had made for us, and I was happy to be dragged out of my misery for a little while. She had come that night without her boyfriend, but I didn't know how. I had forgotten to ask why. It was always all said or nothing said with her. I'd say I went for the latter that night. When everyone was already gone and John was busy cleaning the kitchen, Anita and I went for our last cigarette of the night, sitting on a bench right outside the front door. The garden was already wet from the moisty night and the smell of flowers was coming our way. "Can you smell it?" I asked her. "What, the grass?" "Yes. Can you smell it?" "Yeah, of course I can," she replied, laughing. "You see, this is what I'm talking about. I can smell it in my dreams. I can smell it when I wake up. Not the grass, of course," I quickly added, noticing she was looking at me wondering. "It feels real, Anita, like now." "Are you sure you are dreaming?" she asked, looking in the dark above the garden. "Is there a chance I'm not?" I whispered, like I was asking myself. "Well, whatever this is, I think you need to allow it through. Something is trying to reach out. From within, from outside, I can't tell, but I feel you should give in." And there she smiled at me, let the dead cigarette go, and stood up. "I don't think it will be that hard. Whatever this is, it's growing, it's making contact more often. I don't know if it's just me, or it's the house, those walls. It's like I'm watched. No ghost talks, right? But I think I know what you're saying. I do feel a little bit strange when I'm here. Don't look at me like that. I'm not saying I'm daydreaming. It's more like a feedback, like a sound. Anyway, time to go. Breathe in, let it flow. I have an idea for your birthday. We can talk about it tomorrow when John is not around." And after saying good night to me and him, she left. After seeing Anita's car turning the corner, I walked to the far gates and closed them up. Summer had already started, and I could feel in the air the sweet scent of flowers all around. Back at the house, I decided to stay outside just a little bit longer. It was like I was hoping that the clear, peaceful night would penetrate my flesh, inside my heart, cleanse it. I had moved only a few steps away from the same spot where Anita and I were sitting a few moments earlier, when I started to feel the cold coming up from the ground. The scent of grass was getting stronger, and there it came. I could see it with my eyes open. Again, a group of people, loads of voices all around. No stares this time, no feelings of loss or happiness either, just joy perhaps. A strange, upside-down tree was spreading its roots in the dark sky, surrounded by ceremonial stones scattered across a rounded space. It was like I had been placed in a bubble with no perception of space and time. A man was standing beside me, ready to begin. Suddenly the sky had turned, the ground had changed. Green valleys were embracing his presence as he was standing at the edge of a forest beside a tall, large tree. And above our heads, a voice was whispering again. "Things that have never been are waiting to be. Please remember, there is not much time left. Hurry!"